Hey everyone, Troy Hammond here, and that means you're on the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. You talked, we listened, lots of people have requested, and so we were fortunate enough now to have a chat with Dr. Angela Lim. She is the CEO and co-founder of Clearhead, which is a mental health platform for companies and individuals. This is a really cool conversation. You're going to hear a lot about burnout. You're going to hear a lot about mental health, how we can fix ourselves, psychology, how we should be looking at different platforms like AI, and what she's doing in the industry to really help and support people. It's a fantastic episode, so strap in and enjoy.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning into the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
Can you share what provoked you or what made you go from a journey of obviously being a doctor to getting into startups? What was that journey?
Yeah, so my story is my background basically is I trained as a medical doctor. My first degree actually was in neuroscience and psychology, so I was always fascinated by the potential of what the brain could do, but couldn't really see myself behind the laboratory bench. Then it made sense. I liked helping people for me to kind of apply to medical school and become a doctor. The first couple of years of medical school was really hard. I questioned my place in it a lot of times.
Hard because you didn't know if you were doing the right thing, or hard just because the work's hard?
Both. So basically I would work really hard and I would I would technically be below average because our class average was A+. So it was always below average. And so I think it caused a lot of moments of pause where I asked myself whether this is the life I wanted to live. This was the life that I wanted to live, where I would have to work very hard just to be what I would consider below average. And so I felt like a lot of the aspects of what made you a good medical student was the ability to rote learn, memorize stuff. Mm-hmm. And for me, what excited me was going down the rabbit hole of, complex problems that didn't have black and white answers that you could memorize out of a textbook. Actually, how do you actually take a step back, take a systems perspective of here's the problem, here are all the different things that are happening, including things outside of the health sector that potentially could be arbitraged and brought back into the sector in a way to actually solve these problems meaningfully. So that was I learned that about myself throughout that 5-year medical school. And so as part of that journey of searching for myself, I got involved in health technology, primarily sitting on governance boards for the Ministry of Health. So the government would want to roll out these IT projects. Yeah. That, for example, one of them was around how do you help basically patients with chronic diseases. So they have multiple issues like diabetes, heart failure, mental health. And how do you make sure that everybody's talking to the same song sheet rather than the pharmacist had one record, the hospital had one record, the GP had one record, and the poor patient is in the middle trying to make sure that everybody actually know what's going on, which for most people they're not that literate enough in the health literacy perspective to make that possible and get the best care for them. Yeah. So the whole journey was me just constantly learning, me as a clinician, me as a researcher. So I then went to Harvard to look at health inequity. So why is it that Māori and Pacifica tend to have worse health outcomes than other population? So looking at that, what's the best practices behind that? And then really kind of figuring out with all that best practice, it was not even applied in the real world. There were a lot of lip service being paid to those best practices. And so I think I just kind of got to a point where I was like, I'm not someone who would see a problem and just leave it. And I genuinely felt that there will be at one point in time in the future, which I don't think will be very far away, maybe in the next 10 to 20 years, where our health system would just break. It would break because we structure our system in a way that actually robs Peter to pay Paul. And what I mean by that is health professionals are constantly asked to do more with less, and they're not paid for the work. They're constantly staying over time. And even when they do all of that, the patient still doesn't have great outcomes. So I'm like, something is broken with the system where everybody's unhappy. The patient's unhappy. The health professionals are unhappy. We as taxpayers funding a public system are unhappy with the outcomes, with the long wait time, whether it's surgery or therapy. And so I just was like, what if there was, like, if we build something from scratch again and we say, let's build in these best practices that we know is possible. We know that there's just not enough workforce to meet the growing demand. You know, what's the use of applications like artificial intelligence? So, you know, then I really sort of took a lot of those learnings that I spent trying to learn from everywhere. I was like the sponge. And I was like, okay, well, I tried it. Working within the system, couldn't get anywhere, and so in the end I decided to start Clearhead 5 years ago, and it's been a great journey because we've proven with very little money all the things that we thought was possible is possible. And I think there's a broader piece around, actually, often a lot of the big problems in society, it's not that the solutions don't exist, but there are a whole bunch of other factors that prevent them from actually becoming mainstream.
Yeah.
And that's my fight, I think.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at now.
Yeah, I love that you've gone from the health industry that's underpaid and under-resourced to then a startup where you're underpaid and under-resourced, right? You're like,
I can tell you, I had my friends actually tell me, they're like, I was telling them about how much I pay my people, and they're like, you need to benchmark your salary. Yeah, they're like, you're paying way too much. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just trying to keep good people.
Yeah, and it's hard, right? Salaries are really hard. The market's changed so much in salaries. Like, obviously, I own a recruitment company, and we're seeing our salary data. We're building a salary data product, which is real-time salary information, and it's probably down 22% on what it was 6 months ago. And so, lots of people are perceived overpaid, but if those people are awesome, who cares? You know, whatever they're paid, they're worth it, right?
Yeah, so I think it's always that getting that right balance where people feel that they're appreciated for the work that they do, but also in the context of a startup, always recognize that there are financial constraints. And you know, how do you know, because for me, it's always thinking about what's best for your well-being.
Yeah.
Is it that I pay everyone like X percentage more, but that means that same sum of money means I couldn't hire an extra person that could potentially make everyone's life easier, you know? So I think sometimes people don't consider the broader piece, but I guess that's what makes being a leader hard, you know? And I think that we support a lot of big corporate employers, and I would say that in the context of what is still considered a tight labor market, it actually is really hard to be a middle manager. It's really hard to be a leader. In some ways, it's very fatiguing because it always feels like there's always something wrong that you're doing.
Yeah.
And how do you make sure that, you know, you come to a point where you feel you're well resourced, but, you know, having everyone sort of on the same page about like we're all working to this greater good and everybody feels listened, appreciated across the process.
Yeah. Do you feel like today's society is more burnt out than ever before?
Yes.
And why do you think that is?
Yes, because there are so many factors that comes from, and we see that in our data as well. So, you know, with sort of the population data that we see in real time, what we found is that basically the turning point was COVID. So I think the trend was already heading that way, and then COVID hit. And I think for a whole bunch of people, like that really affected their mental health. And so then what we then see post what we considered the recovery period is like, yes, people's mental health is better than what it was when COVID first hit, but it never returned to pre-COVID levels. And during that period of the last 3 years, a lot of things happened too. There are a lot more climate issues. And in New Zealand, obviously, specifically, you know, just in this year alone, there were many devastation, including the flooding of our own international airport, right? And so that was one, like climate-related issues are becoming more and more prominent. Obviously, that causes a lot of stresses. And then, you know, that means your insurance premium's going to go up, all of that. Of course, the last 10 years where we in some ways had free money or free capital, and that's gone. Probably not going to come back at any time in our lifetime. So people having to readjust, because humans are really good at adjusting to a new normal, and but then the transition to the next normal is often very painful. So people now having to readjust to the fact that cost of living is going up, interest rates are going up. Lots of people bought at the peak into a housing bubble that then now becomes very unserviceable when the interest rates goes up. So there are financial stressors, there are things that are outside of our control with climate issues, just people's expectation around, with all that they're dealing with. What we are finding is like previously people would have challenges with their mental health be one issue. Now what we see is like that same person will have 3 issues, and those 3 issues are usually much more complex or more severe. So then when you keep piling all of that on, and then you add on with this recent sort of economic changes, and then businesses kind of say, we have to tighten our belt, you know, that person that resigned, we're not going to fill their role. So there's a lot of messaging now, which is like the time of like employees being like well supported is over. And now it's all about do more with less. And so but the problem is nobody ever got back to they never got to a space where they were rested. You know, they were kind of just constantly dealing with one thing after another. So in the context of like, say, if you see each issue that has happened for most people as a traumatic event of some sort, then a person is constantly being assaulted by one trauma after another. And usually what you want is this, you know, you had an event or a trigger point, the person had to deal and process with it. They have enough time to do that. And then they bounce back to their normal. And then the next thing happened, but they're, you know, from a place where like their cup is full. But if your cup never got back to full and it just constantly get depleted, then, you know, that's kind of why we see the fact that there is really this very consistent perspective that everybody is burnt out. And do
you think more people are vocal about it now, though, which is a good thing? I think that for me, like when the cup full analogy, right, is I speak to people all the time and we talk about how you're feeling, how full's your cup, you know, and like it's become more of the vernacular, right, that we talk about these things now, and it makes it a little bit easier for people, but yeah, it's still very challenging.
Yeah, you know, and this is me as someone who doesn't have a finance background, but what really is the difference between a recession and a boom period? It's all psychology. If like the general population feels like, oh yeah, you know, things are good, I can spend again, we're out of recession because people are spending again. But if everybody feels like, oh my God, like things are really bad, etc., got to button down the hatches, I got to save that money, it becomes again a vicious cycle in the opposite way. And so when we think about the way that most people are feeling and talking constantly about like things are bad, you know, my mental health is affected, I'm really stressed, I'm really burnt out, we're constantly reinforcing that it's a terrible time right now. And so you see that actually in our movies. So we are starting to transition to what they consider what they call a metamodernism phase of movies. Movies are simply a reflection of societal's pulse point. And so movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once, that really got a lot of accolades in the award ceremonies, is simply touching on to that point where it does feel like everything is happening all at once, all the time. And it's just speaking to the fact that like there is so much pressure. And I think in thinking about when there's so much on your plate, how can you really get to that point where you distill back to, well, what matters? When everything matters, like, you know, like this whole thing around prioritization. If everything is important, nothing is important. And so when we think about when everything is calling your attention, everything is important, everything is urgent. Everything needs to be solved right now. That email needs to be replied at 10 p.m. at night. Your kids screaming at you, wanting your attention. You have to, you have to pay the bills, all those kind of things. How do you keep coming back down to, how do I get to a point where I can create a moment of stillness for myself so that I could see all the balls that I'm juggling and ask myself, which are the ones I'm going to be able to drop? Because you can't, if you feel constantly that like, all these balls cannot be dropped, you're only simply going to burn yourself out.
Yeah.
So how do you get to that point? How do you get to that point where you create a moment of stillness for yourself to kind of reevaluate what's in your life, what really matters? And often what really matters is like, in the context of people who are relatively privileged and not going to worry about where the next meal is going to come, it really is just like the connections that we have with each other. But, we get into a point where, like, we feel like all the things that matters is like, I gotta do that piece of work, etc. And so I'm gonna not go see my family. I'm not gonna go see my friends. And actually that isolation then kind of also creates not the best mental space for you. So I think it's really important for people to realize that they're not alone when they're feeling like life is hard and that they're struggling. And that for a lot of people, they are not taught these skills on how to get to a point of like, being resilient around what's going on and being able to differentiate what matters, being able to set boundaries in the context that everybody wants a piece of you. And so, those are the things that, I felt were the proactive piece. So when I was a doctor, I saw people who came in like right at the end, when like they are going to be hospitalized. But there are so many points, years often, where people are struggling out in the community and they don't have the support systems available. Like, for example, like to see someone for therapy through the public system is a 6 months wait time.
Yeah.
They can't get support in a timely manner. They were not taught in school or at work around these skills around building emotional intelligence. So by the time I see them, it's that like they were massive denial because of the stigma, get to a point, some sort of crisis point, then the police gets involved, or you get hospitalized, or your family and friends stage an intervention, or something happens so badly that you've gone down to requiring, sort of substance abuse, or like your relationship breakup because, your partner is no longer willing to tolerate what's happening. And actually, can I help you go all the way back to like, what are the very basic things that you can learn so that you can take control of your life in the context that a lot of things that are happening in your life is out of your control. Just focus on what you can. And then not stress about the things that you can't control, the things that have passed. Not worry about the future of whether things may or may not happen. And so these skills are missing. And so that's kind of why, again, when we thought about Clearhead, it's like, okay, we don't only want to solve the workforce issue so that you get support to mental health professionals in a much more timely manner and it is the right professional, but also like all these skills right at the beginning, which is like self-awareness. Like, do you know what you're feeling right now, your emotional state, your thought patterns, your beliefs? Are they helpful or unhelpful? What are the behaviors? Are you drinking yourself to sleep using a bottle of wine every night? Like all these things are steps that could have been intervened way earlier. And we believe that giving people tools that is much more suited for the busy individual will allow for much more of that proactive piece.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I'm very privileged in that I can afford psychology. I go a lot because it's fantastic. I get dopamine high from it, like it's given me tools and systems to be able to live a life of more confidence, not extreme confidence. I don't think you ever get that level. But, and I constantly say to my friends, oh, look, go and see a psychologist or go and use something, go and try, like go and work on yourself. And I think, I feel like we're at that inflection point now where people are starting to realize now that if we work on ourselves, we're able to live a much more fulfilling life. And it's never too late. It's never too late to get to the point where you can start, reinventing yourself. And 100%. I always say that, think about your life as a chapter. You're in a chapter right now and you can close that chapter and start working on the next chapter. And so who do you want your main character to be in that next chapter? And so let's create them and be the best version of ourselves. And so. Great.
And look, thank you for sharing that, right? Like, I'm like looking at you and I'm like, you got tats on both arms and you've got like the hipster beard. And like, you know, you're a cool dude, and you know, like you have basically shared with people that it is totally fine to have someone work with you on yourself. You don't have to have a crisis. You don't have to be going through a relationship breakup. You don't have to be someone who's like losing your job or questioning your purpose. It could just be like, hey, I just want to be a better dad, or I just want to be a better leader. Nothing's wrong in my life, but I just kind of, it's maintenance, you know, it's maintenance.
Oh, it's like a car service, right? Like it's the same, we put more effort into our cars than we do to ourselves, you know, into our brains. And, you know, like I unfortunately, I discovered psychology through trauma, you know, like had through a traumatic experience, and took myself to psychology because I was broken, you know, and I had a fantastic psychologist who was just the most wonderful man who helped me rebuild myself. But now, like, I've had, you know, years and years and years now of just living a fantastic life, but I still love psychology because I'm able to talk through problems and issues. I'm able to, you know, get everything out of myself so that I can feel light and happy, you know, every day. And
nice. And I mean, like, I could ask the question of like, who were you before society told you who you were?
Yeah.
You know, how many times do you chase the fancy cars or the job that pays you like 300,000 but really is a golden handcuff because
be careful what you wish for, right? Yeah.
Well, because you haven't taken the time to ask yourself what really matters. Is it that 300,000 salary a year where you have to work 18 hours a day? Or is it actually one where you have a little bit more autonomy on your time, and then you get to spend it with your kids? Or you get to spend it out in the gardens, or you get to do your side hustle on the side that like gives you joy and helps other people but doesn't really pay the bills. And you know, so I think that you cannot discount the amount of self-work that is required, and that it's a lifelong journey. There's no like, oh, I've like reached a moment of enlightenment, you know. So if you've ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, it's sort of, he sort of interviewed all these people he considered self-actualized, which is like the top of the pyramid. And he said even with those people, they were constantly having to kind of get to a point where they figured out what was important to them, their state of flow. And so this is a lifelong journey. And so you're not broken if you've like, I've done all this work and I still feel unhappy at times. It's just, it's normal. But what a lot of these practices help you, including stuff like meditation, means you have a better sense of self. You're more confident about things that compromises those values. And therefore you're much more aware of like, okay, these are my values. So when I am asked to do X and that goes against my value, okay, that's why I feel terrible and like I beat myself up at night. Or actually when I do Y, I'm like, oh, it's really filling my cup. It's like 2x more energy that comes from that meeting than the other meeting that I go where like if I feel like I come out of it and I'm drained. And then being able to really kind of really hone into that. And that's all it is. I think people think that, you know, mental health and well-being is like, it's not rocket science. It's really simple stuff. It's like for you, it might be you have to get 8 hours of sleep.
Well, for me, it was discovering that I always thought that I was an extrovert, and I put myself in situations where I'm having to be extroverted, and then I would spend all weekend on the couch or in bed because I was just, my cup was completely, you know, empty. And so what it made me realize is that I have to be really, really critical about where I give my energy now because I find myself in extroverted situations. I have a podcast, I own a recruitment company, I interview people. And so now I'm really really careful about my energy consumption, and it means that I'm able to maintain that now and be the best version of myself, you know, for the whole week versus giving it all Monday to Friday and then not doing anything for my kids or my partner, you know, on the weekend. And so it's cool. I mean, I think everyone should, you know, work on themselves and, you know, and not be scared to, you know,
don't be scared.
Yeah.
It's actually very liberating once you get to that point. But it's a lot of hard work. And that was something that I recognized as well. It's like this work that we've just talked about, significant amount of time, significant amount of like actually the ability to build that self-discipline. Can you self-regulate your emotions? Can you actually take 15 minutes of your day to journal your thoughts? Can you make sure that you go for a run at least 3 times a week? Can you make sure that you put your phone away so you get to bed at 10 p.m. at night, so you get your 8 hours of sleep before you're up at 6 a.m. to get your kids to school? Like, it's self-discipline and it's hard. And so I think for us, when we built Clearhead and we sort of incorporated a lot, we incorporated AI in the tools that we build, it's almost to kind of say like, okay, well, we know this is really hard.
Yeah.
Like, can you make it so simple to do these things, to be so self-aware about the things about yourself that took you years to figure out, that it felt like magic when you used us within the first 5 minutes. You're like, wow, I just learned something about myself that like I knew took 3 years before I figured that out. How did this thing even know after like 5 minutes, right? So yeah, I think that was the beauty of like building products that could actually make what is very hard and lots of friction almost like effortless.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the goal.
So for those, I guess, that are listening to this podcast, and like obviously, as we said, right, help yourself to some water.
Yeah.
Like we had lots of people that were like, hey, you need to get, Dr. Angela Lim on. We really want to hear the story. And so there was lots of people, but there might be some people, there'll be a lot of people, I imagine, who don't know your story, right, as well. And they're like, oh, Clearhead, this sounds interesting. So what is Clearhead?
So Clearhead is an AI-powered mental health platform. Now that like some of this is in the lingo, you could think about it like ChatGPT plus Airbnb, but for therapy. And
I like that.
And but obviously for us, when we first started it, like we were building our version of ChatGPT like 5 years before ChatGPT became mainstream. And so we really believe that like AI had the capability to augment our very limited workforce, but do it in a way that's clinically safe and effective. And so it was very much, using AI to help people figure out, what is the problem? What do I need? Is it self-help tools? Is it like speaking to a psychologist? Okay, guide me through that process. Help me navigate what I need. I don't want to figure it out because I don't know how to figure it out. And then if you did need to see someone, we had like a global network of clinicians who basically, if you needed to be seen in person within a couple of days, you can, versus like the wait list currently. That's 6 months.
That is tough, right?
100%. If someone comes to you and they tell you they're struggling, they have thoughts that they don't want to keep going anymore, and then you're like, don't worry, I'll find you someone to help you, and you might not be able to afford it. And then you get told, oh yeah, we can give you someone, but 6 months later, you're like, holy shit, I don't know if I could keep this person alive for 6 months. How can I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the skills. It's exhausting not only for them, but it's exhausting for me as the carer, as the partner, as the parent, and so being able to know that like, man, this person's struggling. And then a couple clicks away, I know that they're going to see someone tomorrow. And like, we talked about health inequity. So, Māori people tend to have overrepresentation of depression and anxiety. And yet they are also the ones that are often not seen. And so
why is that? From your studies at Harvard, did you?
Yeah, it's actually, from what we saw in our research, there is what they call institutional racism.
Mm-hmm.
And often these are unconscious bias. And so it's also acknowledging that actually, ultimately, I don't want to just have a very rudimentary like solution to this, which is, oh, you're Māori, so you want to see a Māori person. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe like, like the community's too small and you're like, oh my God, if I talk to this person, they'll tell my whole extended family. That is so shaming. So maybe they don't want to see someone Māori, but someone else who's on that journey who like, this mainstream way of seeing the world doesn't fit my values, doesn't fit the way that I live my life. These people that I talk to, they don't understand the challenges of like me still trying to unpack what colonization had meant to me in terms of robbing me of my language, me of my identity, me of my place, my land. Like, so being able to know that like for every single person, there is no one size fits all, and that health is incredibly personal. But can you empower the individual to figure out what that is for them? And then, like magic, give it to them. And then in the context of what's the number one reason why people don't get help early, it's cost. How do you do it in a way that like is free for them? You know, so like for example, I'll give you an example of a user story. So someone, he was living out in the region where it's harder to find professionals. At 11 p.m. on a Saturday, they basically booked an appointment for someone that they picked in person for 2 p.m. on a Sunday. So that's a after hours in-person therapy session with someone who's a professional that they selected for a specific issue that was important to them to solve. And that whole process took 14 hours and not a single cent out of pocket, really on a couple of clicks.
That's a person in crisis at Saturday night at 11 o'clock at night.
Well, not even in crisis. This was someone who was not in crisis.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and that's the thing is like, if you're in crisis, you can kind of get some sort of immediate support. But there's like 95% of people who are not in crisis who will not get that help. And that was more important to me. It's like, why do you have to be at the point where you're in crisis before you can get help? As humans, don't we deserve the dignity to be able to get the help that we need so that we're not begging for care? You know, that's what we pay taxes for, right?
Yeah.
And so really being, and I think what I learned is like, it's not even about money anymore. It's not about money. It's not about whether the solution can solve the problem. But it's about, is there the will of the people? And in this context, the people who are in influence to be able to say that like, okay, that is, you know, that is something that I actually want to prioritize. I'm not going to accept that, that it is not possible. And it was really interesting. So, for example, we worked with the Ministry of Business to provide basically support for business owners to get help, especially as they struggled post-COVID, post the climate changes that happened. And I remembered at the time, because it was kind of outside of their usual mandate, that they worked with the Ministry of Health at the time as a advisory person. And the Ministry of Health, that spokesperson basically said to them, we don't care how many clinicians Clearhead has. No one will be able to have less than a 3-month wait time. And I'm like, I can't lie. Like, it literally is an online system that you can book directly with. Like, if it's available tomorrow, it's available tomorrow. Like, the system's transparent around that availability. And so I think for me, it was recognizing that actually for some people, they might feel threatened that you performing in a way that they had assumed was not possible threatens them. And often I'm always like, it's not about you. Take your ego aside and just think about all the people who actually would so benefit from support being available. It's not a failure of you or the system, but you know, like the will to change is the most important thing. I think that, and I think, and so as you know, like as a taxpayer, you might think, oh, you know, like how much benefit could that be? You know, providing psychology to people. And so we work with the Ministry of Social Development for unemployed beneficiaries to get support through us, because about 50% of those who are on the benefit will have health broadly as the reason why they say they cannot go to work. And a large majority of that will be mental health. So you can imagine someone who's unemployed goes on the benefit and they said, oh, well, I can't get a job because I've got these health problems. In this case, I've got a mental health problem. And so then they just have to wait on that 6 months wait list. And MSD or us as taxpayers pay them for 6 months worth of benefit. And one of the really cool things that have come out of this program and this partnership is like, we've now seen multiple examples where just 3 therapy sessions, so on average just about $500. $500, let's just say that's 1 week's worth of the benefit spent on helping someone work through whatever psychological impact that is preventing them to feel that they can go to work. And we have now cases where these are people who are homeless, who are unemployed. After 3 therapy sessions, they became employed and contributing members of society. Wow, right? Okay, I invest as a taxpayer 1 week's of the benefit. I help this person work through the fundamental root causes of why they are where they are. And then instead of paying for another 6 months of the benefit, no, I don't have to pay it anymore.
I think I've been saying this for years, right? Like we're just not humanizing it enough,
100%.
like getting into the root cause of what's going on in terms of like people who are unemployed. And I interview people every day, right? And I interview a lot of people. We do a lot of pro bono work where we're trying to help people get back to work. Mental health is one of the biggest causes and the loss of confidence because of that
100%.
mental health. Like I talk openly about my mental health issues. You know, I suffered from extreme anxiety and panic attacks for many, many years. I've had lots of depression bouts and the likes. And so I completely empathize with anyone that has a mental health problem because it's debilitating at times, right?
It is.
And so trying to then think about how am I going to get a job? How am I going to go through an interview process? How am I going to do all these things? And so equipping people and like, oh my God, like a week's worth of the benefit versus, 10 years of like them being on the benefit.
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing it?
Why aren't we doing it? The cost benefit just totally outweighs. And we've been crunching some numbers now for, so we work with a lot of large corporate employers like Spark, like Contact Energy. So, these are the people making sure that our lives work in New Zealand, right? The lights go on and the internet is working. It's super cool. Like some of the data that we've crunched now is like, for every $1 you spend on Clearhead, you get $4 back. So these are not just like arbitrary research numbers that generically gets applied by all these mental health companies. These are numbers we had seen specifically for companies who have basically employed Clearhead as their the sort of industry term is Employee Assistance Program or EAP. Yeah, exactly.
EAP is just for like it's the weird word that we hear when like you come into an office and oh God, there's going to be a restructure and there's an EAP room, right? And there's this rough person in there like, come in here and we'll talk.
Yeah, and it's no human is so versatile that they can be the best person for the diversity of a workforce. So it is more important for us. Like we have 1,000 people, whether that person's working with you on confidence, whether that person's working with you on like PTSD, or whether it's like ADHD assessment, like you really get the expert for what you're looking for. And when you do that, then it's going to be much more efficacious. And then so it's not like randomly tried 3 different people. It's like, nope, you get it right in the first go. And then after 3 to 5 sessions, boom. Yeah. Like turn around.
And can I ask you questions around, so with the AI component, right?
Yes.
Do you find that there is more of an uptake because people don't feel like the emotional guilt of telling their problems to a person initially? Like what's your...
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of stigma still, even though that we feel like we have become more open around mental health and that the public narrative is more accepting. But it's still, in many ways, it's those people, not me.
Yeah.
Those people need mental health support. Young people need mental health support, not me. And so I think that for a lot of people, just coming to acceptance that they might be struggling, that they might just benefit from a little bit of extra help, whether that extra help is like self-management through sort of AI tools or speaking to a professional, it is a absolute leap of faith for some people to get to the point where they can almost make themselves vulnerable enough to know that like I do need help. So I think that's something that is important. But then of course in gross generalization, how do we then empower our young people to not then get into a sense of learned helplessness where every young person has anxiety or every young person, so we need to get that balance right so that people see their mental health as a holistic part of who they are, but that they don't feel therefore that this thing is in control of them. You are in control.
Yeah.
You are in control of your mind. But you can only get there if you do all these habits and practices that gets you to a point where you can drive. It's like basically telling everyone that actually you have a Ferrari.
Yeah.
But like, do you know how to drive it?
Yeah. For me, it's like, my experience is getting, like, psychology helped me to get to the point where my head was clear enough to be able to feel the triggers now. And so I can feel like, oh yeah, there's a trigger happening in my life. I'm too busy at work or whatever it may be. And I can go, oh yeah, I feel that now. And so now I trigger that with, I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to do something that makes me happy, or I'm not going to work, or I'm going to do something else. And then I'm able to balance that now. And it's only because I've done the work to understand the system of my mind and body that I'm able to get my mind to say, all right, my mind can fix my body now, you know, or we can trigger the right thing now.
Yeah. And so often lots of people, and some people often say like, oh, what's the point of meditation? Everybody says like meditation. Meditation is not to kind of like have your mind be empty of thoughts. No, that's not what meditation is. Meditation is exactly what you said, which is that like, when I'm being triggered, do I realize that? Or have I spent 2 weeks being triggered and I didn't even realize until like I just had a big fight with my partner, it blew up, and I was just like, what just happened? Oh no, it was the fact that, you know, for a whole week you were so tired with whatever else that's going on, you didn't take the rubbish out. You didn't pick the kids up on time, you know, like, and then your partner is like silently getting upset at you the whole time, and then finally it blew up in a big argument, and you're like, where did that come from? And it came from because you didn't recognize a week ago you got an assignment where your boss told you that it had to be done by tomorrow, and you like knew it was completely unrealistic, but you didn't say anything about it, and you felt like it wasn't psychologically safe to do that. So you put yourself that pressure, and then you're up all night, and then you're too tired the next day. You know, like it spirals. Yeah. And you didn't have the skill or the awareness or the knowledge or the to stop it right at the beginning until it got right to the other end.
Yeah. How do you keep a clear head yourself with everything that you've got going on, right? Because there's lots.
There's a lot. Yeah. And I think that was kind of what's nice is like, I remember when we first built the product, I was like, I'm not using my own product. And so one of the turning points for me was super excited. I said to my team, I was like, oh my God, our product is good now to the point that I am using our own product. You know, like you gotta dog food your own product, right? And so that was kind of a moment for me. And so there are a few things. One is the in the moment stuff that I really like about our product. So, you know, like let's just say you missed your flight. And you're like beating yourself up about it. You're like, oh my God, if only I just set that alarm, or like, oh, it's all my fault, blah, blah, blah. And you're just like this inner critic, just not relenting. You're already feeling terrible, and like your mind just makes you feel even more terrible. And so can you short circuit that, right? Can you just, for example, for us, that's like, okay, come onto Clearhead now. Express what you're feeling. Can we help you reshape how to see that situation, so that immediately you feel better? So that's one of the things that I have found like quite cool around the product. And the other stuff that like then is like recognizing that actually I've just logged my mood, you know, for the last couple of weeks. And when I looked at the history, damn, like I've been sad. Like I've logged my mood that I've been sad for the last 2 weeks. Okay, what can I do to kind of find something that will maybe cheer me up so that I'm not having another 2 more weeks of like being sad? I'm going to try and short circuit that right now. I'm going to stop this pattern, this spiral. And so really, you know, taking the time to really just make sure that you figure out what is going on in your life when it's very easy to forget. So these things should only not take more than a few minutes. And then stuff that I do as well, like we talked about being in control of your mind. I do meditate. I've been meditating for 8 years now. Every day in the morning before I start, 30 minutes. Before I do anything.
Do you do a particular like Vedic meditation or a particular type?
I basically either do like breath, like so just meditating on the breath or a certain words, or if for example if I find that like I'm feeling like really sad or really like unmotivated, then what are things that can help me work through why I'm feeling like that. And then so that's kind of what I do. And then obviously when I'm feeling more stressed, I actually meditate longer. It's very ironic. It's like when you feel like you have the least time, that's even more when you have to meditate even longer. So when I'm feeling more stressed, I actually meditate for an hour rather than half an hour.
Filling that cup, right? Just like putting petrol in a car.
You got to. And then for me, at least going for a run 2 to 3 times a week. And I live out in South Auckland. It's near a nature reserve, and just time in nature. I go for my run and I sit down, just put my hands on the grass and just like be in nature. And then just taking the time to spend it with like friends and family. And I think, like I said, in the context of when it feels like it all seems too much, what really matters, like, why do we do what we do? I love this saying, and I won't be able to quote it very well, but basically, we work really hard to earn lots of money, to buy things to impress people we don't even like.
I think that was perfect.
And so, if you come back to like why we do half the shit that we do, it's like we often are feeling a sense of like we're not good enough. And so we use these external ways of trying to validating what we feel. And in some ways, really, it's like we're trying to chase some sort of love. We feel unloved. We feel unworthy. We feel not enough. And so can you get to that place where you realize that you are loved, and that actually your friends and family doesn't really care about that fancy car that you're working so hard to try and buy. They just want 30 minutes of your time.
Yeah.
They want you present with them, having dinner, having a laugh, reminiscing about the stuff you got up to when you were kids. And for a moment, you were in a state of flow with them where you're not worried about the past, or is not worried about the future. You're not, beating yourself up about the past, and you're just completely in the present with them, and you form a new memory that they now treasure for the next time you catch up. And that's all that matters. And if you could put your phone away during that time, and you're not getting pinged half the time and being distracted, then that's what really matters.
Yeah, there's this. The study in Australia where they interviewed a lot of people in a rich rest home and asked them what was their biggest regret in life, and that most of them said they worked too much and spent less time with their families. That rings over and over in my head whenever I'm at work and thinking, I need to stop working so much and spend more time with my families.
Yes.
And so, it's challenging, right? And I think you, more than most people, would know with your research and education, and now, as a doctor and now as a startup founder, that life can be challenging and tough. And I think, meditation, whatever it be, like whatever however you meditate or however you take that time to be mindful, is really important.
Yeah, and I want to also kind of just make it very clear that even though I've spent the last at least 10 years working on myself and meditating every day for 8 years, I still get sad.
Yeah.
I still get disappointed. I still get frustrated. I still get angry. I still feel moments where I felt a bit burnt out because I have to do too much for too little. And even when I can say for sure, hand on heart, that Clearhead is like my life purpose. This is what I will intend to spend the next 30 years of my life doing, because I have found a vehicle in which we've built a platform, we've built a team where I can truly see that we can transform the way that mental health support is provided to everyone, not just in New Zealand, but globally. We've seen amazing traction in Australia, for example, since we launched at the start of this year. And so even feeling the sense of purpose and having the autonomy to technically control my own time as the CEO, I still go through all the challenges that other people might. And so I think and that's why I say it's a continuous life journey.
Yeah.
You never reach it.
Yeah. Everyone I interview on the podcast, and so even entrepreneurs that have had $600 million exits, that feeling of losing something after you sell it, right? And I've seen them, they go into depression, they talk honestly about it. And so every single person I know struggles with this. And as someone that interviews people on a podcast all the time, everyone has imposter syndrome, everyone has fear of failure, everyone has all these things and things that we have to deal with. But we look at people on a platform because of the internet and all these things now, and we think they're perfect. I can't be that way, and so then I feel worse because of it. And so
Yeah, and that's why I'm like always very real in a lot of the things that I get to. When I do not take for granted the platform that I have, and that I think it's very easy for people to idolize what we have achieved at Clearhead. And I was listening to a podcast by the founder of Shopify. Sorry, not Shopify, Spotify. And he was saying that, like, actually, it was super interesting because the public adoration of, like, moments when, like, Spotify looked like they were doing amazing on the surface. He said it was the complete opposite of what was happening inside. And then when everybody else was like Spotify's like going like down the tubes, it was the opposite.
Yeah.
And he was always saying it was like always generally about 6 months out of sync. And so I think, and I've also, you know, like heard a few interviews where celebrities have shared, like, you know, when it felt like everybody thinks that I'm on top of my wall, I'm actually at my lowest point. And I think just mainly to sort of like reiterate your point, which is like, you actually don't really know what's going on. What looks good on the surface may not be what's actually happening. And so the simplest thing we can all do as human beings is just to be kind to each other. You know, that person that cut you off, I know you want to like have road rage. Just, you know, maybe they're just trying to like get to the hospital in time to see their parent before they pass. You don't know what's going on.
yeah.
And so just take a moment to like not just go into the worst case scenario and just give people a little bit of empathy. And I think that's the new normal of what's expected by employees. And so we were given more empathy during the COVID period so that people could not be scared and be engaged while everybody's stuck at home. And unfortunately, that's the new normal. That is what employees are expecting now. And so, like I said before, managers and leaders, if that's not your default point, then you need to think about tools that will help you be more emotionally intelligent, more self-aware of how you react, what you say affects others in a way that as a whole, it creates a culture of whether your organization is psychologically safe or not. And because it really does matter. And you know, the other, you know, like for example, we tried really hard to work with the Ministry of Health for many years. And the thing that I had always find very perplexing is that every time I talk to them, and the reason they can't take action is because, oh, we're just going through a restructure. I'm like, you're in perpetual restructure since basically Chai Chua, which is like 3 director generals ago. So organizations that are not safe, people are not going to do anything. They're going to keep their heads down. They're not going to rock the boat. And that is why there is the frustration that we have about what's happening in the health system. So again, it's just to show that like organizations that don't have tools, that don't have data insights on whether you are creating a good culture, whether it's psychologically safe, you don't get to see the implications of it till like years later, which basically means like non-tangible outputs that you continue to spend money on, basically.
Super fascinating. Hey, I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but we've all got to get ready for the High Tech Awards. So you have shared so much information. Thank you. It's been fantastic. We always I want to get one more little one from you because we're finishing this season 2, with saying, hey, if we could put one thing down in the show notes.
Did you save me best for last? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I'm going in on a high note. Yeah. I feel good. My cup's full now, you know?
Great, good.
If you could give one, like if we're putting something in the show notes now and say, all right, this is something that really meant something to you, whether it be a podcast, a book, whether it be a talk, whether it be, you know, like a platform that you've used, you know, obviously we'll put yours down in the low, but
thanks.
Is there something that you can pass on for other people to go off and check out?
So I obviously live in the startup world, and a lot of my life is centered around the company. And I remembered that one of the things that I found challenging about running the startup is that there are moments where you feel like you're investing, and you don't see the output. And I read this book by Jim Collins, which is Good to Great. And I found it super helpful to understand how he thought about the flywheel and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think that for someone who is listening to this podcast, who might be thinking of their own startup or currently running one, and you're feeling stuck, then I think the Good to Great book is kind of helpful in helping me get unstuck at a point in sort of the startup journey that I was on.
Yeah, I concur. That's a great book. And so, hey, thank you so much for your time. If people want to check out your platform, we'll pop some show notes, but where can they go?
Sure. So you could follow us on all the social media channels, as well as our websites, myclearhead.com.
Excellent. Hey, thanks so much for coming in, and I hope you have a great night tonight.
Thank you.
Cheers. I spoke a lot on the podcast about things that I do to fill my cup, and another one that I do is talk to really amazing people. I feel really energized after chatting with Angela. She was fantastic. I really enjoy it. I love vulnerability. I love people that are passionate. I love startup heroes who find something and they just have to fix it no matter how hard the challenge is. And so that's what we heard, and I think that's what we saw on that podcast today. So thank you so much for watching and listening. Thank you so much for Dr. Angela Lim for coming in and chatting with us while we're in Christchurch today. And so please jump on, share this with people that you think might need to hear this message. Share this with people that you think in the industry are feeling pretty burnt out because startups are hard and need a bit of dopamine, or need to understand what they can do to get back on the right track and move forward and build and iterate. And so jump on, follow us. This is the time. Subscribe. Give us some feedback below. And one thing that I'd really love you to do is pop down and actually give us a rating, or give us look us up on whatever podcast platform. 5 stars if you think we're great, or choose whatever you think's best. Until next time, I'm Troy Hammond. Thanks for watching.
This podcast is produced by John Otaka from Empire Films.